Hey everyone, thank you for joining us for today's webinar hosted by Cosvox. My name is Noah Barnett and I run marketing here at Cosvox, and I'm just so grateful that so many of you have joined us for today's live training. We're going to be talking all about how to craft a successful 2018 fundraising plan. We're going to talk about how to set goals. We're going to talk about how to create a plan that's simple yet effective. And then we're also going to showcase how you actually turn that plan into action. How do you align goals with activities? There's three things that I learned in reflecting last year that I just saw myself fall into. And it reminded me of even my time when I was a fundraiser. Prior to joining Cosvox, I actually spent 6 years helping international humanitarian organizations and consulting with others like local arts organizations, community service organizations with their fundraising. How do you engage new people? How do you retain them? And then how do you cultivate donors? And what I found all the time is that there was always this conflict between what we wanted to accomplish and what we did every day. And that was really because we had kind of crossing priorities where we had these priorities. We set out this plan, we were excited about it. When we got into the day to day, the plan just kind of sat on the shelf, and we focused on doing activities, like the quantity of activities over the quality and the alignment of those activities towards our fundraising goals. And don't get me wrong, we were still successful. We were still excited and able to kind of engage with supporters, but it just felt like we were running kind of in a wheel, just hoping for the best. And so what we were able to do is craft kind of a framework or a fundraising tool that I'm going to share with you today. So this tool is actually something that I've used personally. And I use an adapted version of this actually to plan for how we do marketing here at Cosvox. So I'm super grateful that you guys are all here and ready to dive in. Just a few housekeeping items before we just get started. One of the things is this presentation is being recorded. And so you will receive a copy of that recording following today's presentation. You'll also receive the slides of the presentation. So if anyone's wondering if you have to go or something comes up, no worries, you will be able to receive the recording of today's presentation and the slides. The thing you won't be able to do is be able to kind of be a part of the questions and the Q&A that we're going to have at the end of today's presentation. So stick through, but if you don't, or you want to share this presentation with others, don't feel like you have to take notes in full detail. I'm going to send you the recording and I'm going to send you the slide presentation. If you have any questions throughout today's presentation, feel free to drop those in the questions pane of GoToWebinar. We'll try to address as many of those questions as possible throughout the presentation, and if not, during the live Q&A. So don't feel like you have to wait till the Q&A time. Feel free to drop those in. Also, if you're learning anything during this presentation and want to share it out on Twitter, we highly encourage that. Just be sure to tag @Cosvox and hashtag #NPLearning. We do these presentations and trainings all the time. So if you're interested, be on the lookout for other presentations and trainings that we're going to be doing throughout the next couple months that are really going to set you up for success in 2018. Again, this presentation and webinar is actually hosted by Cosvox. And Cosvox is an online fundraising platform that you can use to easily create and manage your fundraising campaigns and donation pages without more staff or without an increased budget. And really, our platform is actually perfect for any type of fundraising campaign. And so as you're thinking about your 2018 fundraising goals, which is what we're going to be talking about for the rest of our time today, Cosvox's platform is actually designed to help you raise more online, reach new donors, and activate your supporters, your community, to help you reach new donors throughout the year. You can create campaigns for annual funds, for Giving Day campaigns, for various fundraising events you have. You can also create donation pages that make it really easy for anybody on any device to give to you online. And we also give you a detailed kind of back office that helps you really streamline your online fundraising and reduce your workload. Our real goal is here at Cosvox is we want to help good flourish. And we believe that together we really can do that, because each of you are fighting for some change in the world that's going to move our world forward. And so Cosvox is really designed to help you do that, both in our fundraising platform and also in our education. That's what I get to do every single day, is focus on helping nonprofits accomplish their goals and reach new supporters for their cause. And so I'm excited to bring this presentation to you today. So I bring up this, if some of you receive our emails, I sent out this little GIF kind of as a joke in an email I sent out this week, but it really kind of embodied how I felt and many of the fundraisers and people that work in nonprofits felt at the end of 2017. You just feel worn out. You feel tired. You feel like you've just been trying and trying and trying. And you're exhausted and not actually reaching your goals. And what this photo really reminded me of, and if you don't know the reference, this is actually from a movie that Disney put out like 20 years ago or something called Cool Runnings. And it's the classic story of the underdog fighting against all odds, going down and crashing and getting all messed up to really overcome those odds by coming together, building clarity and focus between the team, and really setting out to accomplish the goals that they had for themselves, and just to prove that they could do it and make a change and a statement to the world. And so they started off on the beginning of the story like this. And I know many of you are probably here today, and you guys have already shared it in the comments, that you kind of feel bogged down. You feel like your board doesn't support you. You can't organize kind of the efforts of your team. It's really hard to prioritize, clarify goals that really are going to drive impact. And so just like the story behind Cool Runnings, my goal today is to really help you navigate, be a guide that's going to help you navigate from this, where we are today, maybe in a state of confusion or just frustration about how we can really achieve our goals in 2018, to a state of excitement where you're triumphing across the finish line at the end. And so we're going to fight through a lot of complexity today. So we're going to spend the next 40 or so minutes really talking about a lot of different things. We're going to be talking about kind of the fundraising trends that you really need to watch in 2018. I think it's important always, as we think about planning for 2018 or the year ahead, we really need to consider kind of the state of the world that we're in. And that's really going to build the foundation that we're going to help build off of. Then we're going to talk about how you can actually review your fundraising that you did in 2017. What worked well? What didn't work well? What was confusing or you thought was going to work well and it just kind of didn't, or it kind of fell flat? And then the fourth thing we're going to ask is, what was missing? Like, what did you feel as though could have been, but it wasn't? And so we're going to use this quick 4-question framework. What was right? What is wrong? What is confused? And what was missing in 2017? The next thing we're going to do is dive into the meat of today's presentation, where we're going to spend the bulk of our time. And that's really taking the complexity of what your goals really, or how you could achieve your goals, what you could do, all the fundraising tactics, all the best practices, all of those different things. And we're going to push those aside and really try to hone in on, what is your top line fundraising goals for 2018? What does that actually mean? How do we set strategic goals, and not just, hey, we need to raise more money and we need to reach more donors, but how do you kind of go down a level and say, what do we need to accomplish to achieve those goals? And then we're going to talk about how you actually align activities with those goals. And so every activity you do should point towards one of your overarching goals for 2018. You shouldn't be doing anything. You don't have enough budget, you don't have enough time to be doing anything that doesn't directly influence towards the goals that you have for 2018. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time kind of transitioning, is like, once you have this plan, once you have this idea of what your goals are and what are the activities you can do that are going to help you accomplish those goals, how do you actually turn that into kind of a fundraising plan, or kind of a fundraising calendar? Like, what does that look like? How do you turn that into more of an action plan rather than just an overview? And so this is where we're going. And then we're going to land on a live Q&A at the end. And then if you guys have questions, I'll be happy to answer those. Again, this is the framework that I use to manage my fundraising team. And so I'm going to share this with you today, and I would love to provide feedback and answer your questions at the end, or even following the presentation. And then just so if you're interested, I know I said this presentation is going to be presented by Cosvox. The CEO of Cosvox, Rob Wu, is actually going to join us at the end after the Q&A, or even during the Q&A. And he's actually going to showcase what Cosvox's fundraising platform does at the end. So if you're interested in Cosvox's fundraising platform and you stick around to the end, he's going to come on and talk for 10 or 15 minutes about how that can help you. Our platform can really help you accomplish your fundraising goals in 2018. So we have a lot of ground to cover, and so we're just going to dive in. So I talked about what's important to know is what the shape of the world is, or what has changed. Because if we don't know what has changed or what is, we're not going to be able to build an effective plan for the world that we live in. And one of the things we see all the time, and we kind of hammer home when we talk to our customers, we talk to other fundraisers, is the world you fundraise in has just fundamentally changed. And it's not that it's changed, but the world you fundraise in is actually rapidly changing all the time. And so this really requires you to rethink how you go about fundraising. And so we talk about is that we really live in the relationship economy. And this is built upon kind of three core principles that really are going to affect how you plan to achieve your goals in 2018. The first shift we see is that digital first and always connected. And so we see a massive increase in adoption as digital as of the first platform they use. And so we talk a lot about online fundraising here at CosVox. And the reason we do is because we feel like that's kind of the new frontier. It has been the new frontier for probably 10 or 15 years, but it's only increasing more and more rapidly, especially as generations shift and more of kind of your core supporter groups are from Generation X and millennials. Millennials already make up half the workforce. And even though baby boomers are still kind of the core, and even the greatest generation, the generation past that, are still the core kind of main supporters, as you think about growth, you still have to think about the next generations and how you're going to engage and raise funds with them. The other shift we see is that more and more folks are moving to a mindset that focuses on relationships and recommendations driven. And so every decision they make is either influenced by a friend or a family member, or even as we look out to the world to make decisions, whether it's the restaurants we go to, the travel locations we're going to go to, or the causes we are going to support, it all relies on recommendations from others. And so in today's world, it has less to do about what you say about your organization and more about what other people say about your organization. And so how do you tap into that? And then the other shift we see is that there's just an increased competition for attention. It is so difficult to reach new supporters and to really engage with new audiences that you can really inspire to be a part of your cause. And so that has to be taken into consideration. You can't just set goals that say, oh, we are going to acquire 50% new donors. We're going to double our donor base next year. Those goals are harder. And so when we think about our fundraising plan, we're not going to just think about acquisition. We're also going to be thinking about retention. How do you retain your donors? And even donor cultivation. How do you actually leverage the relationships you have more effectively? And so all these things are shifting. And I love this quote by Seth Godin. He says, some organizations will thrive from this increased chaos. Some will be unprepared and some will merely fight it and lose. And you guys have already shown up today. So I know that you guys are looking for ways to thrive inside this kind of new world we live in. But you have board members and maybe you have teams or executive directors that are maybe not on board. And so I love this quote, and I talk about kind of what's being shifted for the intent to really showcase that fundraising in the new relationship economy that we live in isn't just a traditional fundraising playbook anymore. You really have to think differently about it. And so one of our goals here at CosVox is to really help you think well about that. And that's why we do trainings like this. And so I'm going to highlight 4 quick trends that will really impact your fundraising. So this is over and above kind of the general shifts, but these are key trends that are going to be important for you to keep in mind as you make your fundraising plan. The first one is changes in how we use social media. 10 years back, Facebook was just becoming a mainstream social media platform. We could never really imagine how influential it would be in our everyday lives, whether it's from how we communicate through Messenger or even follow people on Instagram or communicate through WhatsApp and other messaging platforms. Social media has really become less of oh, that's that thing over there that the kids do, rather to kind of a central mechanism that kind of connects our world and our ecosystem. A lot has changed in 15 years. And so it's important to keep in mind as you approach your fundraising plan for 2018, the implications of that. So we'll talk about a little bit about this, but in 2018, you really should think about how you shift not all your fundraising away from social media profiles, but really go back to the intent of social media, which was a platform for people, not brands, to showcase what they care about, what they love, and what their interests are. So how do you really ask your supporters and activate them to be a part of that? The second trend we're going to talk about is the continued focus on email. Email accounts are 28% of donors said they were motivated to give through an email in 2016, compared to 6% in 2010. And so email is not dead. A lot of kind of trendy publications will try to talk through that and say, oh, email is a medium of the past. They'll say the same thing about direct mail, and neither of those things are true. Email continues to grow, and even things like direct mail and other more traditional fundraising platform or fundraising mediums are still effective. So don't make general assumptions that these things are going away. Make sure that you actually know what the trends say, and so that's why this is important to understand. So the other one is an increase in online donations. So this is something I talked about at the beginning, but as you think about your fundraising plan for 2018, it must include a digital fundraising strategy, especially if you rely on individuals and are looking to access and acquire new donors. It's important to have a digital fundraising strategy. And again, your donor base is shifting. Baby boomers were once the backbone of your donor base. However, Generation X is actually now the most charitable, volunteer inclined supporters. And as baby boomers leave the workplace and head to retirement, members of Generation X and millennials have taken their places. So you kind of have to do this balancing act as you think about your fundraising plan, where you may have to segment your efforts. And so if you're thinking about retaining your core or maybe traditional donors, it might be different than how you're going, the activities that you might employ or deploy for acquisition or acquiring new donors. Because really those new donors are going to be in the Generation X millennial category, and you really want to be able to begin a long-term relationship with them early. And so you have to think well about that. So like I mentioned, we're going to spend the majority of our time really talking about how to craft an effective plan. And so everything I kind of shared in the first half of this presentation was just background information so that you have a base to think well about your fundraising plan. Part of creating an effective plan is to understand where we have been, what is going to be. And so those trends and backgrounds are really important as kind of inputs as you think through the next steps of this activity. And so we're going to walk through exactly how I actually craft my fundraising plans. And so it's going to be a fight for simplicity. One of the things I've seen over and over again is that there's complexity kind of smothering the idea of what a fundraising plan is. And my promise to you today is that the outcomes of what we're going to talk through today are going to be simple and clear to help you prioritize effectively, align your goals with your activities, and then also ensure that you can coordinate those activities across your teams. And one of the pro tips I want to share is that focus will always win. And so there's a mass of kind of new things, shiny objects out there on what you could do. But for the next kind of 20, 30, 40 minutes, we're going to really talk through how you can remain focused. How can you create clarity, but that still allows you to stay focused? And focus always wins. You don't have enough money in your budget, and you don't have enough staff time. Those are the two biggest problems we hear all the time. And so you can't have a scattered focus. And that's probably not even a good word. Scattered focus is probably not even a real thing. But really, how do you go from being scattered to focus? And so that is going to really help you align your efforts and maximize your budget. Steve Jobs has this great quote that says, that's been one of my mantras: focus and simplicity. Simple can be harder than complex. And so you have to work hard to get your thinking clean to make it simple. But it's worth it in the end, because once you get there, you can move. And so what we're going to talk about is complex. It is hard, and it is something that you have to think well about. But the outcome of that complexity is simplicity. So these are the two things that we're going to try to get to by the end of the presentation. And so these are kind of the one-pagers that you hopefully will be able to develop after we walk through these things. So this is going to tell you where we're trying to go, and then we're going to work backwards on how we're going to get there. So this is a fundraising goals and priorities document that really outlines the focus areas of you and your organization for 2018. What are the priorities of activities that you're going to be doing in each of those areas? What are the obstacles that might get in your way as you approach that? And then what's the targets for each of those as well? This provides transparency and clarity and gives you kind of a guardrail and kind of target for you, your team, and your board. The next thing is the fundraising calendar. So how do you actually map these activities to a calendar so that you know exactly what you're focusing on in Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. You know what you're doing in February. When your board says, hey, we're going to do this, we should do this golf tournament in March, you can say, no, we already have plans for March. And here's why, and here's how that's going to help us reach our goals. And so this is going to help you provide clarity across all the stakeholders on what is going to be accomplished, why it's going to be accomplished, and why that really aligns with your goals. So step one is really to review your 2017 fundraising results. And so the first step in doing that is to review each fundraising campaign from last year. And so what we recommend is you create a spreadsheet with a basic information about each fundraising activity you did last year, including the name of the fundraising activity, the primary purpose and goal, the time frame, the results and outcomes of the activities. And what that really does is kind of gives you a clear picture on, wow, this is all the activities, all the things that we did, whether it's an event, whether it was an email series, whether it was a fundraising campaign. Maybe you participated in Giving Tuesday, you had a gala, you did a new story series over the summer. It's really good for you to outline each of those activities that you did last year that helped you drive towards fundraising, including online, offline. Maybe you had your donor team really go out and focus on meeting with donors. All of those activities should kind of be documented in this quick summary. So step one is really just to kind of list out everything that you did last year. When you did it, why did you do it? Maybe you don't know why you did it. Maybe it's because the board said so, or Johnny, one of your major donors suggested it. Be transparent here. What the purpose was of the event is important to list out. Even if this is only for you and your internal processing, it's going to be helpful for you to really list out all those activities and what the net outcome was. And that net outcome in this case, for this example, is income. But in your case, it might be, volunteers or supporters or new donors. It's really important to kind of outline all of those details. The next part is actually to dive into the details. And so you're really getting kind of an audit of all your fundraising activities from the previous year. Donor information is really key for a proper fundraising audit. And you want to add additional details to each of your fundraising activities, including donor data, total number of donors, returning donors, recaptured donors, gift data, like what were the actual gifts that came from that. And so some of you may have 10 to 15 activities. Some of you may have 3. Maybe you did a mail campaign, an email campaign, and a fundraising event. Whatever it is, really digging into what each of those fundraising efforts were is going to be important. And the idea is that it's going to showcase all the things you did last year and what the actual results were and what the intended purpose were. And so as we think about 2018's fundraising plan and we set goals in 2018, we can then take our activities we did in 2017 and properly categorize them into our fundraising plan for 2018, or, which happens more often than not, put it to the side and exclude it or not do it. So again, this process is helpful for you because what it moves from is an anecdotal, oh, well, that fundraising event is really good and successful, to, oh, that fundraising event engaged 200 people that were our current donors. And so it was a donor cultivation event. And from that donor cultivation event, we saw those donors that attended that event give 15% more than they did the previous year. And so the real outcome of that donor event wasn't that, man, it was just such a good event. It was that there was a 15% increase in the donor average giving of those donors. And then you can compare that to really the cost. And one of the biggest areas that I think are the biggest organizational drags, especially for fundraisers, is events. Events are great, and they're something that I think many organizations should do, and maybe even should invest doing more of. However, when you really look in the details, you start better understanding and comparing the amount of effort that you had to put in, because effort isn't just how much the event cost, it's how much time you invested in it, because there's an opportunity cost to that. You could be spending that time in other places compared to the actual outcome. And some of those decisions are really tough to have because these events might be legacy events that your organization's been having forever, but really getting it down on paper is helpful because you're removing it from your opinion or someone else's opinion on whether the event or activity is good or bad. And you're moving it to more of like, this is what it is. And so that's why we're going through some of these complex steps of documentation, because it's going to be helpful for you to really understand what is and what isn't. And so diving into the details is really, really important. And again, this allows you to also ask the question about what was right about that activity, what was wrong, maybe what was confused or even missing. We talked to a donor just last week, which ran a successful fundraising campaign for Giving Tuesday. He used the new Facebook fundraiser feature. And what he was excited about was the fact that it was a success. He was able to engage people. But when he really dug into the details, what he realized was that by doing his Facebook fundraiser on Facebook, the outcome or the impact of that thing was only in the dollars raised, because he didn't get the donor data to be able to cultivate those donors further for follow-up at year end. And so it was a great Giving Tuesday event, and he was really excited and his team was really excited. But the outcome wasn't as successful as he thought, because the function of that activity wasn't what he expected. And so he wasn't able to kind of leverage that campaign or that activity for further donor cultivation. It was really just a campaign that raised money, which was great, but he wasn't able to kind of use that for its full value and intention. And so again, that's where, what was right, what was wrong, what was confused, and what is missing is a great framework to be able to ask with you, your team, and even your board about the various activities you did throughout the year. Stick with me. This review process is a little complex, but again, like Steve always said, really we're fighting through the complexity to get to the simple. And so the outcomes of this is going to be simple. We just have to really understand where we're at today so that we can effectively get to a more simple and focused 2018 fundraising plan. You guys with me? So here's a good example of an audit that you would do on one of your fundraising activities. And so in this case, there was a New Year email blast that went out in January. And so it was kind of a, hey, it's the new year, we do X, Y, and Z impact, and we're excited to kickstart this with us. This email was tied in. They talked about the subject line. They talked about what happened, what didn't happen, the average gift. And so this really gives a clear idea of like, this is what happened in this campaign. And they can ask questions that are going to be helpful for them to effectively decide as to whether this is something they should do again, but also what other learnings could they get from this email campaign that could apply to other email campaigns. They potentially raised $1,500 from this email campaign, and could they do more of these email campaigns? When I was running fundraising for an organization, one thing we saw is the more email campaigns we ran, the more money we raised. And so there's kind of a hesitancy in running more campaigns or sending more emails that ask people to be a part of your organization's efforts. But what we saw and what we learned as we added more and kind of reflected back and added more and reflected back is that when we ran campaigns once or twice a month over the course of an entire year, we saw our average giving per donor go up significantly, and our retention from supporters go up significantly, because we were always presenting opportunities to our supporters to get involved. And that was something we wouldn't have learned if we hadn't done an effective audit like this. So the next thing you're going to do, which is the next step here, is to really think about different questions. So as you've kind of dove in and kind of done kind of a retrospect or a post-mortem on your 2017 fundraising activities, you can really ask some of these questions with your team. So compare each of them, what sets your most successful ones apart from others, what types of fundraisers have the highest ROI versus revenue and expenses, are these worth pursuing moving forward, what fundraising campaigns energized our supporters online, or even which social media posts or fundraising efforts, or maybe channels that you did that didn't work. So a lot of individuals kind of started using Snapchat, for example, in 2017. And there's a few organizations that are doing really well, and it's really engaging their supporter base. It's helping them mobilize volunteers and inspiring their community to be a part of the organization because they realized that was an effective platform for their organization. However, I also know many other organizations that got into Snapchat because it was a shining object. They didn't realize how much time it was going to take or really what they were doing. And they tried to translate their Facebook kind of posting strategy into things like Instagram or to Snapchat or even Instagram. And I realized that it was just kind of a wasted effort. And so it felt good to do the activity because I had more quantity of activity. However, it really didn't align to their fundraising goals. And so these questions are hard to process because many of those ideas may have been yours or your board members or a major donor or your executive director. But it's important to be able to ask these questions because, again, you're in the mission driven business. And so you want to make sure that whatever you're doing every year and you're investing time in is driving towards that mission, even if that means admitting, man, something we tried, we were wrong on, because that's going to bring increased focus and clarity as you move forward and really fight for the change in the world that you're going after. So the third step that really comes after kind of this post-mortem retrospective is calculating your donation metrics. And what this is going to do is really help you better set goals for 2018. So the next step in kind of creating a fundraising plan is going to be setting goals for 2018. And the thing we can't do is set goals if we don't know where we're at. And so, if you don't know where you're, like many people start kind of like weightlifting goals or weight loss goals in the new year. And one of the things that they always do is they say, okay, great, let's kind of see where you're at today. What are you eating? How is this going? How much, do you weigh? What's your height? How much running do you do? How much activity you do? And what that's going to allow you to do is contextualize who you are, where you're at, and where you can go by stretching yourself and growing towards what success looks like for your fundraising goals. Going back to Cool Runnings a little bit, one of the parts of the movie, for those that are unfamiliar with it, that comes up in the middle of the movie, is they just can't figure it out. They are fighting to compete in the Olympics, and all they're doing is watching everybody else. And so the main actor is watching the Swiss team, which was the best bobsledding team. And he's always just like, how did they do it? How did they do it? And he's taking notes and he's looking and he's learning. And he goes back to his team and tries to apply those same tactics. So he was focused outward to try to learn what he should do and how he should improve. And what he did was he applied those activities that the other team was doing to try to make his team better. And it failed. It fell flat. Because what he forgot was his team is different. What their goals were different. The people in the bobsled were different. And so as you look around, it's easy to look externally to say, oh, wow, look at all these people. Look what they're doing. Look what that organization's doing. Oh, man, that chapter's always raising more money. That arts organization got another major gift. And those things should make you, inspired and excited because the work is continuing in some way or another. But it also can't be how you base what activities you do in 2018. And so spending the time to calculate where you're at, what the state of your house is going to be really effective to help you move forward successfully in 2018. And so things like the total number of your individual donors. You should know how many donors supported your organization in 2017. And those donors could be individuals, they could be corporations, they could be grants. What is the makeup of that? You should also know how many new donors you got in 2017. How many donors were recaptured? And by recaptured, what I mean is how many donors gave to you in 2015, didn't give to you in 2016, but gave to you again in 2017. Some of these things may be hard because maybe you don't have the donation data, but some of these other metrics like how many donors you had, who gave, who didn't give, what's your average gift, are really important numbers to have as you think about 2018. Because if you don't know where you are, you don't know if you're improving and really making progress towards your goals. And then what your retention rate is. And so we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but at the average retention rate, I think it's being generous. The Fundraising Effectiveness Project looked into this and said it's below 50%. So let's say you had 100 donors give to you last year. On average, only 50 of them are going to give in 2018. And so knowing what your retention rate is, though, is important because as you think like, oh, wow, we raised $100,000 last year, we raised 10 million. We want to increase that by 20%. Okay, great. But if you don't calculate in that, oh, wow, we're going to lose 80 or we're going to lose 70 to 30% of those donors next year that aren't going to give to us because of our retention rate, then you actually know what you might need to focus on in 2018 that's going to help you effectively reach your goals. And so you can't just look at the overarching picture and say, wow, we increased fundraising by 10% last year. You really need to dig in a little bit further to look at new donors, donors recaptured, donors retained, average gifts, etc., because that helps you better set goals for the future. Gift metrics are really important too, looking at how often donors give, sources of gifts like online fundraisers versus in person, via check or your website, and then other data that you want to track, such as most common times of the year for donors to give. All of those things are going to be important as you set out to craft your 2018 plan. This is just kind of a final summary of really what you're hoping to kind of establish through this review of 2017. What was your overall fundraising growth? Did you meet your goals? What drove this? New donors, donor cultivation and or retention? And what areas present the greatest opportunity for you in 2018? This step is the hardest step because what it requires you to do is be really introspective and dig into the weeds on what the reality of your organization situation is, where you're at, where you were winning, where you're losing, where you could improve, where you really have great opportunities. And so by establishing this overview of what happened in 2017 is really going to help you build a foundation looking forward into your 2018 fundraising plan. So we've talked through a few of these key things that are important that are going to help you set your fundraising plan for 2018. The first thing we talked about was really the trends or the kind of the state of the world. What does fundraising look like? What is it going to look like in 2018? And what do you need to keep your mind in kind of watchful eye on? So we looked outward. The second thing we did was we really looked inward. And so we're looking at kind of what worked, what didn't work. We're really looking to understand where we're at today. So we have that outward reflection, we have the inward reflection, and now the next step is to really think well about what our fundraising goals should be for 2018. And so there's a few things that we're going to walk through that are going to be helpful for this. Some of you may not have the privilege or kind of the authority to set your own fundraising goals. And so with this step, it's important to collaborate with your programs team to really understand kind of what the state of programs are and what you need to improve or raise. If you're working for a community organization, it's even looking out to your community of supporters and those that are kind of coming along with you to help fund. Things like churches or community groups are great examples of that. What do the people that are a part of your organization, your community service organizations, what do they want to get behind? And so we're going to talk through a few steps that you can take to do this. For those that are listening to this, where they already have their fundraising goals and they were non-negotiable and they were just thrown over the fence, what I would highly encourage you to think through is doing the step 1 and step 2, even in light of that you already have your goals set or been given to you for 2018. Because I think then what it allows you to do is to at least reflect back in a transparent and open way to whoever gave you those goals on what the reality of the circumstances were. And then in the next step, what it's going to require and take from everybody involved to actually get to those goals that were set to you. And that usually creates an environment that hopefully either is, yes, let's do it, we're committed because now we have a clear playbook on how we're going to get there, or a discussion around revising those goals to better align with what the opportunities and challenges you and your organization may have. So what I would love to know, because it's a great time, before we talk about what fundraising goals or how you should go about setting your fundraising goals, what are some of the fundraising goals that you already have been either assigned or are already thinking about for 2018? I'd love for you to just submit those in the questions pane of GoToWebinar, because I'm just always curious, what types of goals, what are you thinking about as we head into 2018? So Kirsten shared that she wants to start a planned giving program. Others are sharing that they really want to invest in acquiring new donors. Sarah talks about focusing on first-time donors. Kenny, sorry, gave a number goal. So we want to raise this much money. Some people are focusing on annual campaigns or 40th anniversaries, transitioning annual donors into major donors, increasing the number of individuals support by 5%, and increasing foundations by 10,000. That's a great set of goals. Increasing sponsorship packets, continuing the culture of donating beyond our initial campaign, increasing donors and number of contacts. So many of you are sharing the goals. New to fundraising, create an actual plan, acquire new donors. Double the number of monthly donors. That's aggressive, but a very powerful way to grow your organization. Creating pipeline for major gifts, building better relationships. $50 million. Love it. Leveraging more corporate partnerships. So as you can see, what the reason I asked that question is you can see a full spectrum of the types of fundraising goals that could be out there. And what we're going to talk through is kind of how do you look at the macro picture of what those goals are going to help you accomplish? How do you set a baseline fundraising goal? And then how do you look at an acquisition goal, a retention goal, and a donor cultivation goal? And then within each of those categories is where the more kind of micro goals come in. And so some people talked about engaging with their alumni or setting corporate partnerships. But why are you doing that? What is the point? And how is that really going to help drive towards the overall impact that you're trying to have as an organization? And so one of the things that I like starting with is talking about what actually drives growth. And so there's three things that I've seen. There's others, but these are kind of the focuses that we're going to talk about today. Is focusing on donor acquisition, donor retention, and donor cultivation. Many organizations that we engage with come to us with a singular focus on what they need to do to grow their organization's impact. And that focus is typically on donor acquisition. And so there's a lack of focus from what we've seen as we've talked and engaged with fundraisers. We've actually been traveling around the country, really having these kind of honest fireside chats with various fundraisers to really better understand kind of the state of the world. What are fundraisers thinking about, and what are the challenges they're facing? And it usually revolves back to donor acquisition. And one of the things that I think is interesting is that there's a lack of focus around donor retention and cultivation. And what I've seen is that there's two reasons. One is because donor acquisition is kind of more exciting. Usually it's involving like getting new donors, and we want to grow our donor base, and we want to expand our reach, and we want to grow our community. And so it kind of has a sexier image, for lack of a better term. The other thing is that I just think it's been historical in our fundraising industry that acquisition is kind of the golden ticket to growing your cause. It's always been, and it's always been the focus. I've been doing this for 10 or so years now, and that's always been the focus. Like, how do we acquire new donors? How do we acquire new donors? And what I've seen is that organizations that actually focus more attention, not ignoring acquisition completely, but focus more attention on retention and cultivation, drive higher results in their fundraising plan. And so what I see is that they actually have better results over time. Someone just asked, what's the difference between retention and cultivation? And I'm going to talk about that now. So we're going to dive into that. The other thing I wanted to comment on here is that in a world where there's an increased number of increased competition for attention, and we're moving towards this kind of trust and loyalty driven environment, whereas before you could just expand your reach, and if you have more budget, you could buy more reach, and then that meant you could acquire more donors. That's still true, but it's becoming harder and harder to do that. And so if you look at the outward trends of the state of the world, acquisition is harder than ever and more expensive than ever. And if you look at the inward trends, that if you actually improve donor retention and donor cultivation efforts by small amounts, you actually improve the overall growth of your organization, in some ways more so than the acquisition side. Again, none of these things can be done in isolation. However, they all need to be focused on. And sometimes the light on the donor acquisition needs to be lowered, and looking at retention and cultivation might be a better and more effective strategy for your organization, especially if you haven't thought about it intentionally in previous years. So the first growth lever we're going to talk about is acquisition. Donor acquisition is essential for growth. These activities will include expanding your reach, outreach to new audiences, and inspiring new people to support your cause. So this is getting someone to give to your organization that has never given to your organization before. And so this is a new person and kind of the start of a potential long-term relationship with that individual. Example acquisition goals could be acquire 200 new donors in 2018, grow email subscriber list by 25% because that increases your access to audience, which then you can communicate to more and you can inspire more people to be supporters of your cause, or activate 20 of your current donors to actually inspire 4 friends to give. So this is kind of taking a roundabout way of acquiring new donors, but actually going to your current supporters and coming up with an activity or a campaign where you're actually asking them to introduce you to more friends and family. And so that's kind of playing in as well to the whole reality that people are relationship and recommendations driven. And so those are all acquisition goals. The second growth lever is donor retention. And so donor retention refers to the number or percentage of donors that continue to give to your organization after the first gift. So in some ways, you might acquire a lot of first-time donors. It's kind of like if you were lucky, I wasn't, but maybe you went on a bunch of first dates with a bunch of people. But the number of people you went on a second date with was lower than the number of people you went on a first date with. And so there's going to be natural attrition to your supporter base. There's going to be people that give to you once and maybe decide that they want to reallocate their efforts or kind of what they care about and the change that they want to get behind to another organization. Other reasons people kind of are not retained to your organization could be because they just didn't feel like their donation was worth it. They didn't feel either they got the value out of the donation they made, they didn't feel like they were appreciated, or they just didn't see the impact of their gift. And more, what I see is that it's less number one, they just get disinterested in the cause and the change that you're trying to make in the world, and more so on those second two. And so retention is a huge opportunity for your organization as a way to grow in 2018. In the last 10 years, donor retention rates have averaged below 50%, meaning half of all your donors who gave last year will not give in 2018. This is kind of general averages. I know our retention rate was higher than this in the organizations I worked at, but I've also seen organizations that have a lower retention rate. So it's important to understand where your organization's at and not just try to get to another state. So having 80% retention rate might not be the best goal for you if your historical retention rate is 30%. The last growth lever is cultivation. And so the biggest difference between cultivation and retention is that donor cultivation is an effort to deepen engagement with your current donors and gain further support from these same donors. And so this is really about if a donor gave you $100 last year and you retain them, they would give $100 to you again. Or maybe $50. Maybe they decrease their gift, but you still retain that donor. So that donor would be retained. However, cultivation is the effort to actually increase the giving that each of your donors is giving to you. And so this could be an overall increase where the average giving per donor is actually 15% more than it was the previous year. Maybe it's the number of gifts that people give each year. There's a lot of different ways that you can approach cultivation that can really help you reach your fundraising goals in 2018. And so once you have these kind of 3 areas understood in your organization and kind of thinking well about how they apply to your organization, the next step is actually to establish goals within each of these. And so you want to establish a top line fundraising goal. So many of you may have shared that. Some said 50 million, others said 85,000, others said we just want to acquire 200 more donors than we had last year. Whatever your top line fundraising goal is important to establish. What is the overall arching? If we had to isolate and we only accomplished one thing in 2018, what does that look like? And you're going to say potentially that there's multitude of things you want to accomplish. But what I'll tell you again is that focus always wins. And so it's important to actually establish a primary goal for the year. And so this could be more dollars raised, more donors retained. What is the top line fundraising goal? The second thing is you want to make sure you note the resources, both budget and staff time, that you have to devote to achieving these goals. And so, what is the reality of your circumstances? Who is working on fundraising, and being honest and kind of transparent about what that actually is and the reality of that. Many organizations only have one or a half person, especially smaller organizations, to really devote to fundraising. And so when those organizations set goals, they might be unrealistic to the amount of effort or time and budget they're able to put into those efforts. And so again, this process is really about being transparent in the complexity, with the goal to actually simplify to having a clear plan that's going to align your priorities, align your activities, and coordinate effort. And then the third effort is to actually determine specific targets for donor acquisition, retention, and cultivation. So even if your top line goal, I'll use one of the participants of today's webinar, is to raise $85,000 next year, or to increase giving by $85,000 next year. It's important to then break that down and consider how donor acquisition, retention, and cultivation are going to play into that. Each of those variables, for lack of a better term, are essential to understand that are going to help you reach that goal. And so reaching $85,000 in increased giving, is that going to mean maintaining a retention rate of 70%? So you still need to maintain the same retention rate that you had last year. Maybe it's actually increasing your retention rate by 5 or 10%, which would then generate $50,000 more next year. Or maybe it's acquiring 3 times the number of donors that you acquired last year. And that, on average, will probably equate to $60,000. And then the other $25,000 is going to be attributed through donor cultivation. So you're going to keep retention the same, double down on acquisition, and then increase cultivation a little bit. So again, this is taking what your top line fundraising goal is and actually breaking it down to what are the specific acquisition, retention, and cultivation goals you have to actually achieve those. So this is a lot of math, and some fundraisers may not be into that. But what it is it's important to know that to get to a specific goal, if you know what success is, it's important to break down what it's going to take for you to achieve success. So once you've set your goals, the next step is to really align your fundraising activities with your goals. And so this is the fun part. So we've kind of drudged through the complexity. You've established a top line goal. We're going to increase giving next year by $85,000. And you've established your various acquisition, retention, and cultivation goals. We're going to acquire 2 times as many donors as we did before. We're going to maintain retention or increase retention by 10%. And we're going to increase the average giving per donor by 15%. And all of that fleshed out is going to help us reach our $85,000 goal. The great thing about this is that if you have an unrealistic goal, once you break that goal down, you're going to realize that maybe your goal is either too high or unachievable or unrealistic. Not to discount miracles, but it's important to be transparent with how you're going to achieve that, or at least that you're depending on a miracle. Or it's going to help you say, oh, wow, like we need to actually increase our effort in donor cultivation. And so our CEO or our executive director needs to spend 20%, 30% of their time really focused on deepening our current donors, the relationships with our current donors. And so this is all set out to actually increase the effectiveness of you actually reaching, or the success rate of you actually reaching your goal. So I showed you this at the beginning of today's presentation. I'm going to kind of bring it back up because, again, this is what we're trying to get to. This is a simplified version, but many of you would do better with a simple version of a fundraising plan than some of the multi-page documents that may be sitting on your shelf or that your board put together. And so what this really focuses on is that our top line fundraising goal is to increase income by 25% compared to the previous year in this specific example. How we're going to do that is we're really going to grow through donor empowerment and retention. And so in this example, we're focusing less on acquisition, even though acquisition is important, but we're really focusing on cultivation and we're really focusing on retention. And so that's very clear. Everyone knows across the organization that that's what we're doing. And then what we did is we actually broke that down into acquisition, cultivation, and retention goals. Again, this is just for illustrative purposes. So your goals will be different, your activities will be different, and your obstacles will be different. Some may be similar, but most of it will be different. This is, again, just for illustration purposes. And so the next step for you on how you should craft your fundraising plan is to brainstorm all the activities you could do that would help you reach each of your fundraising goals. So if you're trying to increase retention, isolate that goal and say, how could we increase the number of donors that gave to us in 2017 that give to us again in 2018? And this is where you get creative and fun. And this is a great activity to do with your board, your executive director, or your team if you have a fundraising team or a communications team. Think of all the ways that you could retain your donors. And this is where it's kind of no hold barge, making sure you have all the ideas and you can bring them together. And then the next thing is to actually review those later on. But during step one, you really can brainstorm all the activities. This could include sending thank you notes. This could be including calling all new donors to thank them and really talk through how their gift to the organizations could be helpful. It could include activities like sending 3 updates throughout the year that are just updates on what's going on. What is the impact that your supporters are having and how they can be a part of it again? Maybe it's actually going and meeting with some of those donors that had given to you for the first time last year. Because you're a community organization, you're like, wow, these people are first-time donors. We want them to give again. And so we want to make sure that we sit down with them and see if what they're trying to accomplish aligns with what we are and how we can partner together in the future. That's step one. The second step is to review each list of activities, your 2017 review and available resources, and determine which activities you'll make a priority. This step is essential to do with a final decision maker. And so if you're not the final decision maker, it would be highly encouraged to invite those final decision makers to this part of the conversation to really help prioritize which activities you're going to invest in, knowing you only have a limited amount of resources, time, and you have specific goals that you're trying to reach. The third thing you want to do, and again, so what this will be is in the focus areas column on the left-hand side, you'll actually have a list of all your priorities of activities that you're going to do that are going to align with that specific focus areas goal, which could be acquisition, cultivation, or retention. The third thing you want to do is note any obstacles or challenges that you'll need to overcome to accomplish these activities. And so as you can see in this illustration, we talk about historical budget allocations, like how budgets are handled, made it difficult to invest in acquisition. And cultivation, we had small staff and no time too hard, meaning we just didn't have the time. Our development team turnover was high and historically limited focus on donor engagement or donor cultivation. Donor retention, again, board doesn't see this as a top priority. They're always focused on acquisition rather than retention. And there's just competing priorities. We always focus on new donor acquisition, and that typically gets the priority, not a good thing. And no processes for donor retention. So we never have thought well about what the journey of a new donor is and how we make sure that we try to retain them throughout that process. The fourth step is to set specific SMART goals for each of those activities. And so what that means is you're actually going to dig another step further and say, okay, we're going to acquire 200 donors because that's going to help us increase funding by 25%. But what are other specific activities that you're going to do and goals and targets that you're going to set that your activities are going to be aligned to? And the end idea of this is that every activity should be aligned to the focus area, and every activity should have a very specific target or goal. And these goals should be time-based, they should be measurable, and they, again, should contribute to the overall success of your organization's plan. Number 5, you're going to review any activities from 2017 and your brainstorm that didn't make your priority list and add them as omissions. What this means is that you're actually documenting what you're not going to do. And this is really a pro tip. What you're not going to do this year is almost as important as what you will do, because that allows you to remain focused. And so that you keep yourself, your board, your team, the fundraising committee, the executive director in check to know that there's a list of things that you could do that could be good ideas that you're choosing not to do. And so you're making a conscious decision of the things you're not going to invest in this year. All of this is going to get you to this simple fundraising matrix or fundraising plan matrix. And what that matrix is going to allow you to do is easily share with your team. When I was in doing this and using this tool with my team, we had these in our offices. When we had meetings, we would keep these in our hands to talk through them. We would have update meetings where we said, hey, Bob, how is that building out of a friends program that going? Where is that at? How is it aligning with our goals? Oh, we need to build out a middle donor program focusing on giving updates. What does that look like? Who's responsible for that? And that's really what moves into the next step, is how do you actually turn your fundraising plan into an action plan? And we're not going to be able to dive into the entirety of this, but I'm going to walk you through just 2 steps that really focus on how you turn your plan into an action plan. And the outcome is going to look something like this. So this is a clear map and calendar of all the activities that you're doing, what the realistic kind of scope of each of those activities are, why you're doing them, and when you're going to do them. And again, this looks very similar to the audit we did for 2017. And once you do this for 2018, it's much easier for you to audit going forward. And so it's a lot of complexity to sift through at the beginning. But once you nail this down, it becomes much easier to plan for every year in the future. And so you actually map out every activity you're doing. And so your team has a very clear plan of what you're going to accomplish this year, who's going to do it, and what goal it actually aligns with. And so you can measure success and you can make sure that that activity actually is accomplishing that goal. One of the great examples I have is that an organization was doing a donor engagement event, and they had a gala, and the gala was always focused on growing donor cultivation or donor acquisition. And what they hadn't realized is that all the donors that came to the event were current donors, and that was it. And so every year they may have 10, 15% new donors coming to the event, but the majority of the donors, 85% of them that showed up at the event, were donors that had come previous years. However, the fundraising team would say that that event was the best way that they could acquire new donors. And so what happened there was their strategy and intent wasn't aligned with reality of what the event was actually doing. And they realized how they were measuring success with the event and how they were marketing and communicating the event weren't aligned. And so those activities needed to be corrected. And so they were able to change the event to actually encourage more of the supporters that did come to the event to bring other people with them. And so they were able to shift the focus of that event to be about donor cultivation and donor acquisition, but they didn't know that until they really reflected on why they were doing that activity and what the reality of the outcome was. So creating this fundraising calendar is actually quite simple. You really just map each activity from your fundraising plan to a specific month and time frame on your fundraising calendar. You assure that every activity is tied to a specific goal or target on your fundraising plan. And you include a brief on each activity, any costs, time allocation needed, who's responsible for the activity, and the predicted outcomes. Again, this is just a great document to keep your team focused throughout the year. And so the greatest investment you can do as we head into 2018 is to think well about what your fundraising plan is. There was obviously a reason why you came to this presentation today. It's because you want to grow the impact your organization's having. You want to reach your fundraising goals. You want to make the change in the world that you're fighting for every day. And so by spending and investing the effort in this plan is going to get you closer to success. The great thing is we've done a lot of the work for you. And so you can download all the templates that you saw throughout today's presentation by going to cosvox.com/fundraisingplan/calendar. And so this is going to equip you with the same documents to really begin to outline this. It includes the goals and priorities document, and it also includes the fundraising calendar so that you can actually fill out the priorities using the spreadsheet that we've already created. And so we really believe that this is a powerful tool to align priorities, build consensus across your team, and ensure activities are designated towards your goal. Now, the hardest part about all of this is it really depends on you doing the work. And so, to kind of circle back to the Cool Runnings example I used in the beginning, there's a scene at the end where they kind of created a plan where they were really excited about kind of getting after it. But at the end of the day, they had to get up and go after it. And so this is a great scene where they say, rise and shine, it's butt whipping time. And I would just highly encourage you to look at 2018 as a year of opportunity for your organization, but still going to require you seeing that opportunity and really getting at it. And I believe this fundraising plan and this tool is a way for you to create simplicity and clarity on how you can actually achieve those goals in 2018. We want to open it up for questions now. We spent the last hour really digging into this. And again, we had to fight through the complexity to get to the simplicity. And I believe we've done that, but I would love to answer specific questions that you have about what we talked about today, or actually how to craft and leverage this in your own fundraising this year. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look through some of the questions that have already been asked. And so then we can really dive through those. After the Q&A, Rob Wu, the CEO of Cosvox, is actually going to join us and kind of talk through how you can use Cosvox's fundraising platform this year to actually help you achieve some of these goals as well, by streamlining your online fundraising management and also just equipping you with the tools to do activities that can help you cultivate donors and reach new donors this year. Let me look through some of these questions. I believe Rob's already joined us too, so Rob might be helping with the Q&A as well. But if you have any questions, feel free to drop those in the questions pane now, and we'll dive through as many of those as we can in the next 10 or so minutes. So many of these things are still fundraising goals. So I guess all of you have no questions about today's presentation, which is encouraging to me, because that means I did a great job at communicating, but I doubt that. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop those in the questions pane. I appreciate many of you sticking around a little bit longer than expected, and just grateful that you invested the time, and I really believe it's going to be helpful as you move forward. If you have any questions that maybe you haven't been able to ask already, you can feel free to email me at noah@cosvox.com. I'd be happy to schedule some time to talk through this with you independently, or really help you think well about how you can acquire new donors, cultivate them, and retain them in 2018. We have a few different questions that are coming in now. Karen asks, it's 2 years too late to thank donors and try to get further donations from them. Hey, Karen, I don't think so. Obviously, it would have been better for you to engage those donors earlier. But one of the great things is that a sign that someone would give to your organization again is if they've already given to your organization or like-minded causes. And so a great way to think well about those donors is to still consider it as though you have to reacquire them, but intentionally developing a campaign or a fundraising activity that's targeted towards them, maybe bridges the gap between their last engagement with your organization to where you and your organization are at today and where you're trying to get to, is a really effective way to kind of leverage what you have, instead of having to go after kind of unknown people. One last thing on that, Karen, is I think what is important though is making sure you have the processes and follow-up in place to cultivate any new donors coming in, to ensure that kind of that 2-year lapse in those donors getting thanked doesn't happen again. And so it's kind of that chicken or egg thing where it's like, do you go after them or do you set up processes to thank them? And I think it's always important to focus on retention first, then acquisition, because every dollar and hour you spend on retention efforts actually adds value to every hour and dollar you spend in acquisition, because your efforts will be more valuable to the organization because you'll keep that donor longer. Molly says, how do you effectively engage the board in executing a fundraising plan? One of the things that is interesting is part of this process is identifying what resources, including time and effort, staff, board, that you have to effectively implement your fundraising plan. And so one of the things that I think is important is having an honest conversation about what role your board wants to play and what role they should play, and how they then factor into your fundraising planning. And so instead of just taking your fundraising plan to them and saying, hey, here's your role in this, it's saying here, it's kind of bringing them along the journey and saying, these are our goals for our organization. This is why we set these goals, which they probably had some role in. and saying, okay, this is kind of the resources we have, and this is the steps we'll need to take to actually get to achieve this plan, unless we identify more resources to be a part of this. And so you're inviting them in to help you solve the problem of accomplishing your fundraising plan, and kind of leaving it up to them to see that they actually need to be a part of this and they are an asset and resource to help you accomplish that. So that's helpful, Molly. Boards are tough. And so a lot of times, if you have a board that's been unengaged for a long time, it's important to really step up and kind of establish that the board is essential for you to accomplish your goals. And if not, set a fundraising activity that is to get new board members. And so a lot of times getting new board members, especially once you go through this process, is a great activity to actually invest in, because you know that new board members are going to help you in the future. Hey, Lindsay, I think what's interesting about kind of crafting a full fundraising plan and then sharing it with your team is that depending on the various stakeholder groups you have, it would be more important to share the part of the plan that's relevant to them that they need to be a part of, and kind of showcase how that piece of the puzzle kind of plays into the overall, but not overwhelming them with all the details. And so even though your organization is all kind of volunteer driven, and the action and enforcing, encouraging these volunteers to help is challenging, um, it's important to know that that's a limitation and an obstacle, and to really address that kind of directly as you craft those activities to accomplish that. Linda says, we're all volunteers. How can we really estimate available resources? Linda, I think that's a conversation you really need to have with your team and those that are volunteering or your board members. The other thing too is if you know that you're trying to accomplish certain goals and you need more people or support, there's a great opportunity for you to craft that as a fundraising activity. And so one of the activities that you're going to do is to actually ask and engage people to be a part of the fundraising plan, whether that's asking them to thank donors on your behalf, do advocacy activities at events or different community events and activities, or if maybe it's emailing and calling previous supporters and asking them to be a part of it. A lot of times what we saw at our organization is when we asked our donors or our supporters that were really engaged or volunteers to do something very specific and kind of tell them the impact that that's going to have, they were very willing to get involved. And so I think it's, again, just being very clear and conservative around what resources you actually have to accomplish your goals. Barrett says, how do you handle if you don't have the data to kind of set a clear plan? Barrett, I think it's like just having, there has to be some data. The organization has, survived in the last 12 months. So we've been getting a kind of anecdotal report of like what's going on, looking at how much money they've been able to raise and really setting benchmarks off that. There are limitations, and you kind of have to dig for what you can get. What did they do last year? What didn't they do last year? And that should help you drive at least some benchmarks for the plan moving forward. If you have nothing, you can still use the plan to say, okay, well, these are our goals. How are we going to get there? Christina, I think it's important to even maybe show them this presentation that kind of unpacks the importance of digging into the various uh, data points that are going to be helpful to craft effective goals. If they're like, in some ways, if they're not into allowing you to dig into those numbers, I would question why. Because if you don't have access to know like where you're at and where you're trying to go, it's going to be really difficult for you to be able to do your job effectively. And so if your job is to help them move the organization forward by fundraising, I think it's good to be honest and clear about what you need to be able to successfully do that. And if your organization's focused on accomplishing a mission, I think meeting at common ground, which is to accomplish this mission we have, these are what we need. And so for us to accomplish what we both want, these are kind of the steps that we need to take to get involved. It's not as hard as it may seem or overwhelming. It's really about just kind of focusing on getting a handle on how many donors you had last year, who those donors were, and then how you can move forward towards the goals that you have as an organization and what it's going to take to get there. Peter says, on the fundraising calendar, you have a goal alignment column. Does that relate to the first column on the fundraising goal spreadsheet? Um, Peter, it actually relates to the far right column. And so basically, every time you put a fundraising activity on the plan, you want to make sure you have a corresponding target of what you're trying to accomplish that then kind of rolls up to the larger goals. And so those numbers actually align with the goals in each of those columns. Marcelo says, why is it important to know frequency of giving? Frequency is important because you know when people give and why they give at different times. And so you really can create exactly what you say, a plan to better engage them. And so if other supporters are giving more frequently, typically it results in more giving over time because they're more committed. So they're making more transactions with you than others are, even if they're doing once. And so they're actually less likely, if they're that engaged with you, to kind of be to leave your organization's support, or you have lower risk if you get multiple donations. I think the other thing too is it's more about those donors that are only giving to you once or twice. How can you figure out how to engage them at more times throughout the year to get more gifts from them throughout the year to increase that? Amy, no worries. I'm going to send a copy of the presentation and the PowerPoint so that you can dig into this whenever you have time. That's all the time we have for questions today. I appreciate you guys sticking around kind of for this Q&A. I know Rob's going to be joining us now to kind of talk through Cosvox's fundraising platform and how our platform can really help amplify your results in 2018. Hey, Rob.
Hey, Noah, thanks so much for all the insights on fundraising planning. I know that it's 2018 and the possibilities are endless when it comes to fundraising this year. I know for me that when we close up 2017, it's like closing a book. Like you can just toss out all the challenges in the past and then you start a clean slate with 2018. And I love some of the insights that you shared. But cool. So thanks so much for taking the time, guys, just to be on our webinar today. For the next few minutes, what I really want to do is basically take some of the insights that Noah shared around donor acquisition, donor retention, fundraising planning, and really show you how you can apply it directly to actually driving donations. And we've been talking a lot about fundraising planning, like strategies and plans and all of that really important stuff. But there comes a point where you can do too much planning and you don't have enough time to spend on execution. So what I want to do is just really show you some of the tactical ways that you can apply these concepts to actually driving more donations, to actually moving the needle, to actually increasing your impact through online fundraising. So what we do at Cosvox is we're an online fundraising platform. What it really means is we're online fundraising software that you can easily use to launch different types of fundraising initiatives. So everything from simple donation pages all the way to peer-to-peer fundraising campaigns or fundraising websites. You can use Cosvox throughout the year for any type of fundraising type. So for example, when you go into Cosvox, into our software, you can select from different types of fundraising. Noah talked a lot about the ability to retain donors. So one of the great ways to do that is through a simple donation page. So what you can do with Cosvox is you can easily create donation pages or even mandatory recurring gift campaigns. A lot of times, what we see at nonprofits is that there's a drop in donor retention. And the main reason why is because there's not a really easy way to nurture a donor as well as to get them to donate again and again. So one of the features that we recently launched on Cosvox is mandatory recurring gift campaigns. So what that really means is that if you want to drive your donors to make the donation, you can run a fundraising donation page through Cosvox by using our easy-to-use software to create a donation page that just takes monthly recurring donors. So let's say you're creating an email, you're drafting the perfect story, you segmented the donors that are the most likely to become a recurring gift donor. Then what you can do is you can just direct them to a link to your Cosvox donation page that's meant for recurring donations. So donor can go in, they can select a specific impact level, like give me 2 pro bono days in programming for 2 kids. They can select them out, go through our donation process super easily. And we do collect all the donor info, including their postal address and email address. And they can easily just do a few steps and click on make a payment to make a donation. So at CauseVox, we make it really easy for you to launch different types of donation campaigns on a donation page. You can have a static donation page. You can have a recurring gift campaign as well. But also, we have different other fundraising types. So as you're planning and looking at your fundraising calendar, you may want to have a donation page, but also throughout the year, you have different types of fundraising initiatives. So it could be a crowdfunding campaign, or better yet, it could be a peer-to-peer fundraising campaign. So for example, what you can do with CauseVox is you can create different types of peer-to-peer community-driven fundraising campaigns. This is a great way for you to acquire new donors, because then you can leverage your community in order to reach new audiences and to convert your audiences to become new donors. So that way, throughout the year, you can plan out different touch points that you can use to touch on new donors to help them become a recurring gift donor. So it's the whole cycle. So with our platform, instead of having to depend on your IT person or a dev shop that they hire, or even a volunteer that you're trying to wrangle to do some work for you, you can easily use CauseVox to launch different types of fundraising websites and peer-to-peer campaigns throughout the year. Everything's branded to your organization. So for example, the Mudhood Collective over here, last year for their annual campaign, they used our platform, easily designed it, easily branded it with their own logos, their own colors, as well as they easily set their settings. So they put in a progress bar, put in an impact metric counter, so it counts the units of impact they're having, the number of women being reached, for example, to help tie the donor dollar to a specific impact. And they easily use CauseVox to launch a peer-to-peer fundraising campaign. You can put in any type of content that you want to, and then you can leverage your community to drive new donors. So for example, Trish over here, she was able to create a personal fundraising page for the Mudhood Collective, put in her own fundraising goal, and then send it out to her friends and family in order to drive new donors to the Mudhood Collective. In a nutshell, through these personal fundraising pages, as you build this into your fundraising plan, what we've seen is that the organizations that use peer-to-peer fundraising on CauseVox raise twice as much as the campaigns that just focus on crowdfunding or just focus on donation pages. And the main reason why is because you're able to leverage somebody else's audience. Instead of just looking at your own base of people, your own email list, which you've emailed time and time again, you can actually reach new audiences without having to spend money on ads, without having to rent attention. You can leverage relationships in order to power fundraising. And we all know Fundraising 101 tells us that the stronger relationships that you have, the more you leverage them, the more donations you'll get. We also have a team fundraising functionality built into CauseVox as well. So if you have groups of people, schools, companies, they can all fundraise together in a team, and people can donate in a team. This way you can create different pockets of community so that it makes fundraising more personal as well as more relatable. Another way you can use CauseVox is by leveraging some of your corporate sponsors. So this year, instead of having to ask them just for another donation or another contribution or another sponsorship to an event, you can actually engage their employees, engage their audience with a branded fundraising campaign. So for example, World Bicycle Relief over here, they partnered with Rotary International, this big organization that I think most of us have heard about, and they co-created a fundraising campaign that has that community-driven approach. So you can brand your fundraising sites on CauseVox. You can easily customize it. You can partner with your sponsors, and then you can leverage not only their fundraisers and the people that they know about in order to drive donations and new donors to your organization. So the possibilities are endless on CauseVox, and one of the things that we want to help you do is to make it really easy to create your different fundraising sites. So when you're in your admin interface in CauseVox, you can create as many different campaign sites as you want to. And we make it really easy. So for example, let's say you want to design your campaign sites. You can easily put up your own logo, upload an image if you wanted to, or if you wanted to do something that's more of a fundraising campaign, then you can easily do it on our platform as well. So we have easy management interfaces here that allow you to keep track to help save you time, easy design interfaces to help you edit your content and your colors and your logo areas so it matches your branding, as well as easy back office settings as well. So we know that as you're running your fundraising campaign, as you're putting your plans together, a lot of our customers and our nonprofits are under resourced. You don't have enough time to really manage the administration. So we can do that for you. So for example, at CauseVox, you can easily put in your own donation receipts, a template. You can specify something that says, hi donor, and you can thank them. And then as the donor donates, they're automatically sent an email donation receipt without you having to manage it on your own. So in a nutshell, what we can do at CauseVox is we can help you create different types of fundraising campaigns and donation pages, recurring gift campaigns throughout the year. We can help you easily manage it on our platform as well. And we can help you acquire new donors through our peer-to-peer fundraising capabilities. We do all of this in one simple, easy package with flexible month-by-month pricing. There's no contracts, no setup fees. Now, if you're interested in learning more about CauseVox, I do encourage you to go to causevox.com. We taught you a lot today about fundraising planning, and I encourage you just to check us out so you can actually take some of these strategies and plans and execute them efficiently and effectively this year without having to increase your headcount and without having to increase your budget. So find out more information on CauseVox at causevox.com. If you're interested in a one-on-one demo, I'll be happy to carve out some time on my schedule or Noah's schedule so that we can actually show you CauseVox, review your fundraising plans, and see how it can integrate into some of the ideas that you have. So I'll be happy to chat. You can always contact us at hello@causevox.com or sales@causevox.com or support@causevox.com. And again, check out causevox.com. It's our website with tons of features, as well as you can browse our pricing page as well. So thanks so much for your time today. I'm going to hand it back to Noah.
Hey, Rob, thanks for sharing more about really how our fundraising platform was designed to help fundraisers like those attending this training reach and accomplish their fundraising goals more effectively. Like I said, this content and plan that we walk through today is the best way that I've seen for you to build clarity and focus into your fundraising strategy. It helps you outline priorities that are really going to drive impact, align goals with activities so that you're not just doing a quantity of activities, you're doing quality activities. And then also just coordinate your efforts between you, your team, and your board. All of that's essential for you to be able to make the change in the world that you're fighting for. And so I'd encourage you to consider looking back through the plan and the documents that I'm going to send out to you tomorrow morning, which will include the recording and the slide deck. You can also access that free plan at causevox.com/fundraising-plan-calendar. I'll include a link to that as well in the follow-up. Thank you guys again so much for investing the time. And we just hope that you have the best year ever and capitalize on the opportunity that 2018 presents. Thanks so much and have a great rest of your day.